Hi, everyone from all around the world. My name is Marilyn Shannon, and I'm so delighted to be here with you again today for another one of our in real life kind of talks, because that's what I like to bring you is what's happening in real life, right? So I want to introduce my guest today, and her name is Rachel Korazim. Is that correct, Rachel?
Razim, yes, that is correct.
Was welcome and thank you so much for being here. Rachel is joining you from Israel. And she is a
Mhm.
fascinating lady, and she's going to come back again. But today we're going to talk about something that Rachel has been involved with. And I'm going to turn the mic over to you, Rachel. Tell everybody who you are and what you're doing.
Thank you, Marilyn, and thank you for having me on what sounds like a very interesting program. So, who I am, my name is Rachel Korazim. I live in Tel Aviv, which is one of the largest cities of Israel, not the capital. Jerusalem is the capital. And even within Tel Aviv, I live in the southern part of Tel Aviv, which is called Jaffa or Yafo or Yafa in Arabic. And it's important for me to say that because people oftentimes hear about Israel in the context of conflicts and Arabs and Jews. Jaffa is one of the communities that is mixed, and Arabs and Jews live together as good neighbors. And this was a conscious choice that my husband Yossi and I have made when we chose to live here. So my address already in my particular way tells you something about me, maybe a little bit about my politics, maybe a little bit about my ideologies. But today I want to go more specific. Not only my country, not only my town, not only my neighborhood, but the specific room I am sitting in, which is my study. And you can see in the background some of the pictures that hang there. One of them includes one of my eight grandchildren with me, etc. Why am I talking about my study? Because in a way that was totally unplanned, this particular view became the home of literally hundreds of people during COVID times when they joined me in what I created. I'm telling you, Marilyn, inadvertently, I haven't planned it. I will tell you about it, to get together and study Israeli poetry. Now, you'll have to admit this is weird, as most of my participants are not Israelis. They live in North America, they live in Europe. I have a few from other places. You'll have to take in, to think about time zones, etc. I'm teaching late in the evening, which is daytime, early afternoon in the East Coast, late morning in the West Coast, etc. But I would have people who will get up at 6 a.m. in the morning in Australia to join us. So, how did that come about? Let me remind you of the early days of COVID, way before we started fighting about vaccinations and such, because we didn't have them yet. The early or the mid days, I would say, of March 2020. Okay, so everybody is at home. I think many people like myself thought, this is gonna go away in what? 2 weeks, 3 weeks, at months max, maybe 6 months. Like we know nothing really. And we are at home and it's all stay at home and be safe. And let me mention age as well. I am 77 now, so I was 74 then, already included in the age group of keep away from grandma and grandpa and don't get close and make sure that they are safe and don't get out of home, la 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 la. So it's pretty annoying. One of the things that happened in those days, you may remember, is that there was a very, very bad situation in Italy. The Italians were dying like in large numbers. I don't know if you remember that. And one of the things that happened is that group of people who were sheltering at home in Italy were going out on their balconies and terraces and singing and recording themselves. Now, there is something I need to tell you. I'm not very proud of it, but it's a fact. And by my age, I got used to it. And that is the fact that I cannot sing. I cannot carry a musical tune if my life depended on it. I love singing, but I have always done it when I'm on my own because it annoys other people. So, the other thing you may want to know about Hebrew, and we are getting into the teaching because I am a teacher of poetry. And of course, all my activities got canceled because I travel to America teaching Israeli poetry. I welcome groups here at Hebrew University, the Hartman Center teaching poetry, but nobody is coming. So I'm at home. And so one of the queer things about language, and when we teach poetry, we have to deal with language and translations, is the Hebrew language does not distinguish between the words poem and song. They're the same word, shir in Hebrew. So here's one morning, middle of March 2020. I get up early in the morning. I do what most of us do. I turn on my cell phone. And the Italians, guess what, are singing on their porches. I pick up the phone in my hand, go wherever one goes when we get up in the morning, and I say with a half pissed off tone to my husband, I cannot sing like the Italians, but I can teach poetry. I say it in Hebrew, it's the same word. אני לא יכולה לשיר, I cannot sing, אבל אני יכולה ללמד שירה, but I can teach poetry. And with the cell phone in hand, I come to this very study as you see me now, all of you, turn on my laptop, go on Facebook, and I say exactly that. I cannot sing like the Italians, but I can teach poetry. And at this and this hour, I calculate the time zones. I only, believe it or not, even before COVID, had an active Zoom account, and even a professional one, not just, the freebie that they were giving away at the beginning. So I give them the link and I added one line, which I think was crucial. And the line was, the lesson will take place with no matter how many participants, even one. Come. And I added, email me for texts. So I send out the link, on Facebook. This is early morning in Israel. The Americans are still asleep. I have no idea what will happen. And I have to figure out now which of the many, many sessions of Israeli poetry am I going to teach? Because you see, my particular way of teaching Israeli poetry, I'm not saying it's exclusive, but it's mine, is I do not go by genres like romantic and this and that or modern. I do not go by period. I go by theme. I take a notion like women voices, biblical motifs, Arabs and Jews, war and bereavement, peace and such. And along such theme, I can sort of create 1, 2, 3 more sessions depending.
Raquel, I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
So the poetry that you're sharing, is this poetry that you are writing, or are you?
Oh no, I'm not a
Okay.
poet.
Oh, you're
I
not a
can't
poet.
write
Okay.
poetry. I can only read. I'm a
Okay.
teacher of poetry. I'm
So
teaching the classics. I'm teaching the modern. I'm teaching well-known poets. I'm teaching obscure poets, and I heavily depend on translations.
so
Who among the yeah.
So is there some kind of, so I take it that each of those categories, there's some theme going on with the poetry.
Let me tell you.
Okay,
Let
yeah.
me tell you about it. So, knowing my audience and having done this for a zillion years, I know, let's be honest, do guys come to poetry classes? Not so much, right? Very few guys. Do very young people come to poetry classes? Not so much. So I know from experience that the major chunk of my audience are women, adult women. This influenced my the choice of the first session. It was women voices in modern Israeli poetry. That was the first session I offered. I prepared it. I prepared a nice PowerPoint with background, with pictures, with stories about the poets, etc. And I was waiting in the Zoom class for my first class, not knowing any one of them. Would you like to guess how many showed up for the first class?
How many?
Mm-hmm.
How many? 600?
No, 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 no. Come
Oh,
on. People don't have Zoom at that time yet. People don't know how to go back.
50 people, 50 people.
50 people. And before the class is over, they are asking me, so when is the next time?
Wow.
And I said, tomorrow.
And they came?
On the next class, unbeknown to me, my students already paid for an upgraded thing because we had more than 100 and we bought a 500 account and that
Okay,
stayed
got
steady.
it.
During the heavy days of COVID, when everybody was sheltering at home, we would have an average touching 300 participants every day.
So what
Wow.
is the way, in which way do you teach that is unique to you?
Okay, so first of all, you have to realize that although I would want to very, very much, cannot teach the poem in the language it was written. I have to rely on translations. The popular ones, let me throw just names around. Yehuda Amichai is the most well translated Israeli poet into other languages. It's not a problem. But I want some unique voices sometimes. And you know about men and women, and they're always the guys will be translated first and the women later. And some of the classic women, there is a poet called Rachel who died in 1931 but left a mark to this day. There is a poet called Leah Goldberg who I love dearly, who passed away in the year 1970. And I've just come back from visiting where she was born in Lithuania. So what's the particular way? First of all, I need to choose by the best translation I can find, which is a weird choice, right? I want my theme. I want the voice of women. So now we are looking at women. And I want women who have something to say that is maybe non-conventional. Let me give you an example. I don't know how much you know about Israel, but even if you visited, if you're a young person and you read occasionally, and you occasionally will go to a Jewish event, you will know something about the notion of Zionism, about how there is this ideology of Jews wanting to go back to their God from his holy land to reestablish a Jewish existence there, and how all of us who come here after having suffered outside of Israel. Well, none of us, not all of us have suffered, but still we are supposed to all be in love of the country. And in earlier generations and mine, the generation of my parents, people came after the Holocaust. Of course, they were supposed to be in love with the country because it saved them from the worst that could have happened. And even before the Holocaust, there were persecutions and such. So there is an expectation that Israeli poetry will reflect love of country. It's true. And yet, I will look for the poets that will say, yes, but, okay? I'll give you a line from Amichai that I love to start my teaching with. You know how in the Bible, in the book of Psalms, we are committed to never forget Jerusalem, like if I forget thee, O Jerusalem. So Amichai starts one of his most famous, to me, poems that I always like to start with, which starts with the line, Jerusalem is a place where everybody remembers he has forgotten something, but doesn't remember what it is. Can you see how he's fooling around with Psalms? Yeah, we committed, but really? I look for those. Okay? I look for the kind of poetry that is well versed in our tradition, in the classical writing, the biblical, the Talmudic, the later, etc., but also will find an original, personal, individual voice.
So Rachel, kind of up to date, what are you noticing with modern and current poets? Are you noticing a shift in their voice? I'm sure some kind of shift in their voice, in
First
the
of all, it's
theme.
not monolithic, but in the last semester, that one but last, the winter semester, I'm now into the spring and summer one. The winter semester, I went out there and said, listen, guys, we've studied together for 3 years. I gave you the classic, I gave you the mainstream, I'll give you a little bit off mainstream. Let's now go to the corners that we have not yet visited, that were new for me as well. So for a whole semester, I offered LGBT poetry, ultra Orthodox poetry, settlers poetry, very political, Mizrahi Jews who came from Muslim countries and are viewed in Israel maybe as different and lesser than those who came from Europe. And I went really into those places and we could listen into some amazing voices. You would think that maybe those people that we call the ultra Orthodox have no poetry. Think again. You would think that there is not a particular Israeli LGBT poetry. How about if you are ideologically committed to one side, let's say the one that says that it's against the settler movement, against occupation of Palestine, and you fall in love with a young man who lives in a settlement? What happens then in the poetry?
Mm.
Does politic win? Does love win? Will you go to the settlements to visit with the family if they will accept you? Now, it's not just the LGBT issue, it's the political issue. Okay, very interesting. So I like to do that. But nowadays, I don't know if you are aware of that, but Israel is going through a major political upheaval when we have a right-wing government and we are on the streets. I'm on the streets every week demonstrating. And I created a whole session called Dissent and Crisis, looking into the past of Israel and seeing previous such events when Israelis could not agree and how those are reflected in poetry.
So I have to
So
ask you a question.
go ahead.
Why poetry for you? What is it about poetry that I'm guessing, and I'm going to put words in your mouth or words out, that you love? What is it about poetry for you?
There is the fact that a poem, a good poem, is like a precious stone. It's brushed and it's cut and it's reshaped. So every word, every sound matters. And that's the beauty of it. You read a 400-page novel, you and I know that you could skip a few pages. Not with a poem. You want to look at the full structure, take it as a whole, taste it, not dissect it too much. Just enjoy and try and get the meaning, but also the sound. Sometimes I will show them what is lost in translation, how because the very precious artistic translator gave up on something in meaning or sound in order to get something that is poetic also in English.
Hmm. So how so do you notice with poetry, and I know that we said we were going to talk about 15 or so minutes because we want to come back again and do some more, but what are the healing properties of poetry for an individual? What does poetry do? I know when I sit down and I read a book, I see words and I hear phrases and I reflect on a story. And what
I
does
don't know.
poetry do?
All I can tell you is what people are telling me. I know what it does for me, but what people are telling me who now belong to this Rachel Korazim Israeli Poetry online group. I'll go to the extreme. People, and not one and not two, told me that I saved their life during COVID. That the fact for a whole hour and 15 minutes, 3 or 4 times a week, they concentrated on beauty, on meaning, on controversial ideas, discussing it with other people. And then people started inviting their friends, their brothers, their sisters to join. And after class, they would go on the phone and continue talking about it. And it kept them alive and vibrant. And they told me honestly, I hated poetry in school, but the way it is happening for our group, it's totally different. I can tell you that even like last week, I was on this trip to Lithuania, and there were amazing people on the group with me. One of them is the professor emeritus of math who joined this trip in the footsteps of Jewish poets and writers, etc., in those places. And the people who organized the trip, I was just a participant. I was not a teacher there. But the history professor and the tour guide, I told them what I was doing and how I connected to some of the poets whose birthplace we were visiting. They asked me to teach two poems, one at one place and the two at another. And this professor of math, a child survivor from the Holocaust himself, an amazing person, comes to me and says, Rachel, if I had a poetry teacher like you back in school, who knows? I would have ended not being a mathematician, maybe. So, poetry, if presented well, can give people a sense of holding beauty, of appreciating preciseness, of, of appreciating a loving, a beautiful way of expressing a thought, of seeing an image that other people do not see, and suddenly you see through them. And it was happening all along. People were experiencing loss and came back to class. People started marking important anniversaries. Can we dedicate the learning today to the memory of my husband, my mother, etc.? Like unbelievable stuff happened. We really became a community.
You know, I've never heard anyone describe poetry the way you have just now, and it's so fascinating, and it makes such perfect sense based on.
Why don't you go online to
I'm going to.
korazim.com,
Okay.
korazim.com, just as my name is spelled on the screen, and add .com, and you will see recorded lectures, and they are all accessible. And go ahead and enjoy, and so can your audience.
So everyone listen to what Raquel is telling you. Go out, go to her website, get these learnings because they're free, and open up another world to yourself.
So,
And or maybe you have loved poetry before, but you've not even engaged in Israeli poetry. Or I mean, maybe it's just a brand new thing and you want something new to explore and experience in another adventure. I would recommend this. It's fascinating, and you know, it's amazing what you'll learn, the insights you will acquire by listening into these poets. It's
mhm.
fascinating, and I'm going to go do it too. So tell them again where to go, Raquel.
Korazim, just my last name, as it is spelled on the screen, korazim.com. And
Perfect.
then the site is self-explanatory. You will see where the recorded lectures are. No, no problem at all. It also gives you my email, and if you have a question, you can write to me through the site.
Perfect. I really thank you so much for
Pleasure.
and for sharing with us. Is there any final comment, word, advice, anything you want to give to our audience today?
Yes, that if you have a bad memory of experience with poetry, give yourself a second chance.
Amen. Sounds good. I'm going to do that too. All right, so we're going to
Okay.
have right. So we're going to have Raquel back again. Please leave your comments for me. Uh, Subscribe to our channel. Share it if you have a story that you want to share. Little bits, big chunks. It's all necessary. Let me know. I'd love to have you. Just write to me at marilynshannon.com and we will interview you as well. So have a wonderful day, everyone. See you soon.